Lamed Daled, right? 34. And yeah, so I guess you can wait a minute because I was going to do the Mishnah again, but since it's you and me and we did the Mishnah yesterday,
Yeah.
we could just start from the new parak and maybe it'll be a short daf even. Oh, Hanan's here. We're gonna have to do it for him.
Okay.
It'll be a quick review. I'll wait till Hanan joins, then we can get started. You with us, Hanan? I guess that's a thumbs up. I love the picture. So we yesterday we actually finished this Mishnah, but we're gonna read it again because obviously it's Daf Lamed Daled today, and people probably came expecting to learn part of Daf Lamed Daled, so we should learn the Mishnah. And this Mishnah is the middle of the page, right, or at least a third of the way down. And the theme that we're continuing is you have a group of people who identify. The previous Mishnah was an individual, an unknown individual, and this Mishnah is an animal. And they sort of try to guess at what the animal is, and they make a Nazir that's somewhat conditional on that being the case, right? So they say, I'm a Nazir, I'm so confident this is a behema, we're going to see the animal, that I am a Nazir that this is a behema. So the case in our Mishnah is this animal we called the koi, which Charlie read for us yesterday, a lot of footnotes from Slifkin, right? So about what it is, no one knows what it is, but clearly has characteristics of both domesticated and wild animals. It's kosher. And there's all these questions about how you eat it and whether you can eat the fats like the chaya, whether you have to cover the blood, whether, other halachot of behema and chaya that are different based on whether it's domesticated or wild animal. However, what happened here is ra'at koi, says the Mishnah, they saw this koi, and person number one, assuming that we have individual people in the Mishnah, person number one said, Hareini Nazir, she said, Chaya. I commit myself to being a Nazir, and I'm confident that this is a wild animal. And then the second one disagrees and says, Hareini Nazir, she said, Eino Chaya. I'm a Nazir, this is definitely not a Chaya. And the third person says, Hareini Nazir, she said, Behema. And the fourth says, Hareini Nazir, she said, Ein ze Behema. The fifth says, Hareini Nazir, she said, Chaya u Behema. I'm convinced that this is a cross species, right? This fits both categories, Chaya and Behema, and I'm a Nazir with that knowledge. And the sixth one says, I disagree, it's neither, maybe. Hareini Nazir she'ein zeh lo Chaya v'lo Behema. So all six of those people have comments on the animal. The seventh person, remember we talked about this yesterday, is Matfis, then says, I don't have any opinion on the animal, but I want to be like one of you. Right, so number 7 says, Hareini Nazir, she'echad mikem Nazir. At least, I don't know, you crazy guys, everyone's disagreeing about this, but at least one of you is a Nazir. I'm a Nazir if one of you is a Nazir. That one, I should say that one of you. And the 8th guy says, Hareini Nazir, she'enechad mikem Nazir. One of you is not a Nazir, which is how Tosfot understood that yesterday. And the 9th person says, Hareini Nazir shekulchem Nazirim. I'm a Nazir that all of you are Nazirim, says the Mishnah, Hare Kulan Nazirim, they are all Nazirim. And we said yesterday, again, this is a little bit of a review, but the Mefarish here in this first shot says this is Beit Shammai. The Beit Shammai in the Mishnah yesterday, on Daf Lamed Bet actually, was of the opinion that when you say what's called Hektish Ta'ut or Nazir Ta'ut, that counts. Even if you say, I'm a Nazir because it's the morning and it's the night, it doesn't matter. The fact that you said you want to be a Nazir, even under wrong assumptions, you become, it's like hektish and it could be chal, and it has effect on you. And so you're a Nazir under any conditions, even if you're mistaken. Now, not if you made it conditional, right? So not if you said, I'll be a Nazir if it's 5 o'clock. You said, I'm a Nazir because it's 5 o'clock, then it's a ta'ut because you're wrong, but you're still a Nazir. So that would be Beit Shammai. The other opinion that we talked about again yesterday is that this could even be according to Beit Hillel, who says that when you identify a person walking down the street, which was yesterday's Mishnah, right? If I said, if this person walking down the street is, I used Abraham Lincoln yesterday, then I'll be a Nazir, right? So even there, where Beit Hillel argued and said, if it turns out not to be Abraham Lincoln, you're not a Nazir, that's because it's a factual thing, right? You can determine, is it that person or not? But in this case with a koi is an indeterminate animal. So there really is no way, there's no time that we can say it is a chaya, it is a behema, it's a chaya and a behema. It's just subject to debate. There's doubt. And because of that, there's always a suffix that maybe what you said is correct or not correct, and therefore it's a suffix nazir for all of them. And like every other suffix nazir, as we saw again yesterday, you basically have to make a condition. You can't be a nazir by suffix because you can't bring a karban, but you have to say, if you want to get rid of your nizirut, you have to say, look, if I was a real nazir, I accept that. If I wasn't, I'll do a volunteer nizirut. And so either way, I'm going to be a nazir for the next 30 days and then bring a karban. So that's how it would go according to Beit Hillel. Says the Gemara now, Tani Chada, one bright or one Tana taught, Tishan Nizirim. And we're talking in our Mishnah, the case I just laid out, of 9 people who commit to being a Nazir. The plural is Nizirim. Tanya Inich, but another bright said that our Mishnah is referring to Tishan Niziriot. Not 9 people, but 9 episodes of Nazir, which is Niziriot, right? So you one person committed to being a Nazir 9 times. So first of all, Bishlama, Tishan Nizirin, we for some reason make the nun instead of the mem here, but it means the same thing, right? 9 Nazirs, that's easy. You go into Havi Gavri Tfei, it's Vazelbe, right? You have a lot of people, and they add on to the 6th to say an opinion about the animal, and then the 3 more who add on and say, I'm a Nazir if you are, I'm a Nazir if you're not, I'm a Nazir if all of you are. So that's easy. That's 9 people. Right? How do you find 9 niziriot for one person? Our Mishnah, it's not. The first 6 are easy, are also simple, right? A person says, I'm a Nazir if it's a chaya, I'm a Nazir if it's not a chaya, I'm a Nazir if it's a behema, I'm a Nazir if it's not a behema. But the last 3, you can't say, I'm a Nazir if I'm also, like, if that person's a Nazir, if you're referring to yourself. The way you'd have to explain is where you say, I'll read our Gemara, but then I yesterday talked about why it doesn't make a lot of sense. But our Gemara says there's basically 9 people who do this, and then a 10th person who shows up and says, Hareini Nazir Nazirut Hakol Alai. I want to be a Nazir of, like, I'll accept all of the above. In which case, because all the other people were Nizirim, according to Beit Shammai, as easy, according to Beit Hillel, by suffix, so then this person is also a Nazir. And as I mentioned, the challenge with this is that if you say Hareini Nazir, that implies 1, and then you accept 9 more, so you might be 10 Naziriot. And so the Gra actually on the side takes out the words Hareini Nazir, right? So basically you just came in and you said, Nizirot Hakol Alai. I accept all of what you guys have been talking about all morning, which means I accept 9 Niziriot on me, which means you'd have to be a Nazir personally 9 times. The Hadron Allah Beit Shammai. Okay, new parak, new concepts, totally different thrust. I guess Doe's going to take you through a lot of this in the coming dapim, because we are only going to scratch the surface of this sugya today. But what I'm going to do, if you excuse me for 1 second, I want to find the pasuk. I don't have a Gemara that has the psukim, so give me a second to find the pasuk. Because I think what we need for this parak really is to read through the psukim, right? Because the Torah, when the Torah describes essentially what a Nazir is, right? Sorry, I should know how to find this. Give me a second. Safari is going to help me, right?
Safari.
What parak is it? Do you remember?
This is the
Bamidbar.
Bamidbar.
Vav? Or is
Yes, Bamidbar Vav.
it, sorry. This is not the way I normally look at things. No, I think we're gonna keep going. Past Vav. Vav is still not Nasa yet. Maybe 6. So Bamidbar is Vav. Oh, you said Vav. I was looking at Dalet. Sorry. Okay, perfect. So the beginning of parak Vav in Bamidbar Naso says, "Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe leimar." Right? We've read this many times. I'll read it. Daber al bnei Yisrael v'yamarta lehem ish o isha ki yafli, which is a word we discussed yesterday. Right? That has to be very clear. Lindor neder nazir lahazir lashem. You make yourself a nazir. So now pasuk Gimel, which is the critical pasuk. It says miyayin v'shechar yazir. You should be separate from wine and shechar. No, we don't know what shechar means. It sounds like something that makes you drunk, right? Shikur, but what is it? Does it mean whiskey? Does it mean some kind of wine? We're going to discuss that, of course. That's one pasuk. Yain shechar yazir. Not one, I mean one statement. Then it continues and says, chometz yain, chometz shechar lo yishta. The vinegar that comes from wine and the fermentation from shechar, don't drink that. So essentially a derivative category. And then it continues and says, kol mishrat anavim lo yishta. Don't drink that which is soaked in grapes or wine. And we'll see in our Mishnah even, what does that mean? Does that mean that let's say you take a piece of bread and you pour wine into it and the bread soaks up the wine, right? So you can't eat the bread because there's wine in the bread? Or does it mean that if the wine flavors the bread, then wine flavored bread is also prohibited, right? Because it's soaked in wine. So we're going to discuss that. And then the last words in this pasuk are anavim lachim viveshim lo yochal, right? Things that are dried, grapes that are dried, and lachim are moist. Grapes that are fresh, that are hot, warm. Fresh? Lach is moist. Viveshim, and grapes that are dried, you shouldn't eat those things either. That seems pretty repetitive. You already told me not to eat grapes, right? Well, maybe it doesn't, because you didn't say grapes specifically. You said wine. So that's pasuk gimel, very specific. Pasuk daled now says kol yemei nizro mikol asher yasemi gefen hayayin. Anything that comes from gefen hayayin, from the vine, mechartzanim ad zag. So things, now, the way we're going to darshan this today is that first pasuk was specifics, what we call a prat or a miyah. This words kol asher yasem gefen hayayin is anything, is a marbet, right? So it's a riba, it's a klal. And the final words in pasuk daled are mechartzanim va'adzag lo yochel. Don't eat chartzanim va'adzag, which we usually translate chartzanim are pits, right? And zag is the skin of the grapes. Don't eat those things either. So three basic categories, even though the first one, of course, has many details within it. Okay? And so Charlie put it up in case you didn't get it. So that is the psukim. So now let's get to our Mishnah, which is going to darshan that in great detail. Shlosha minin asurim v'nazir. There are three types of categories of things that are prohibited to a nazir. The first is truma. The nazir cannot become tamei to a mate. Tiglachat. The nazir cannot cut their hair. And the third one, which is the one we're about to discuss, is hayotze min hagef, products of the vine, right, of the grape. What does that mean? So says our Mishnah, kol hayotze min hagefem mitzarfin zeh im zeh. What we think that means, right, is that we just read you in a pasuk many categories of things you can't have. Grapes and dried grapes, which are raisins, and wine and pits and skin. If you eat a portion of a combination of all those things, they're mitzarif, meaning even if it's not a shear of one, but it's half a share of one and half a share of the other, they will combine because they're all together. We'll see why we know that. So that's one principle. But continues the Mishnah, the size that you have to eat from grapes is a kizayit. So you're only chayav once you eat a funny thing, right? It's a grape, but you're eating a zayit, olives amount. So that's the basic responsive requirement. Mishnah Rishona Omeret, some take out the words Omeret, but the first Mishnah, meaning the original halacha, was ad sheyishteh revi'it yain, that in fact you're not chayav until you drink a revi'it of wine. Again, we'll see in the Gemara, what does that mean? Because if you're eating a grape, how much of a grape is a revi'it of yain? Right? Is there some conversion between the liquid shear, which is a revi'it, and the solid shear, which is a kazayit? How do you understand that? So that's the first one of the issues that we're going to have to discuss. Rabbi Akiva says, and it seems that he's arguing, afilu shara pito biyayin. Even if you soak your bread in liquid wine, right? You soak your bread in wine, now the question is, and what? So Rabbi Akiva says, there's enough in there to combine to be a kazayit your chayet. The question is, there's two ways to understand that. One is that there's enough wine in the bread so that the wine equals a kazayit. Now, how does wine equal a kazayit if wine is a liquid, right? So you'd have to say that the volume of wine of the liquid displaces a kazayit. Or maybe Rabbi Akiva is saying that, in fact, no, that you only need a little bit of wine, but if the wine flavors the bread and the bread plus the wine equals a kazayit, right, which is a terminology called isur mitzaref laheter, right, that something that's prohibited and something that's mutar combined to make something that's usur, maybe that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying, and of course we will discuss this. That is Rabbi Akiva. The fourth line of the Mishnah now, fourth line of the page, sorry, is chayav al yayin b'fnei atzmo. You're chayav one prohibition for drinking wine if you're a Nazir, v'al navim b'fnei atzman, and on eating grapes, v'al chartzanim b'fnei atzman, and on the pits is how I'm translating it. We're going to see in the Gemara, it's not so clear that's what chartzanim are. V'al hazagim b'fnei atzman, which I think I translated as the skin. All of these make individual isurim, and again, we'll see what that means. Like on Shabbos, right? You can do multiple things and be chayav many times. Rebbe Lazar ben Azaria says, and this is a very innovative detail, that I disagree with the whole thing. Ein chayav ad sheyochal shnei chartanim v'zag. You're only chayav if you eat 2 pits and the skin around them, meaning you have to have more than one. Now, again, it's not so clear from this point. Is he arguing at overall, saying that if you drink a glass of wine and you're a Nazir, you're not chayav? It's only if you drink a glass of wine and eat 2 pits, right? Or is he saying for the remember that last pasuk, which was michartzanim adzag, maybe that pasuk is a separate prohibition that if you're eating pits, you need to have 2 pits in the skin, right? But if you're in the earlier pasuk and you're drinking wine, that's a separate category. Again, all to be discussed. Now, finally, our mission just wants to make sure you know what the parts are. Elohin chartzanim, ve'elohin zagim. How do you know what the chartzan of the grape is and what the zag is? Hachartzanim elo chitzonim. The chartzanim is the external part, what we call the skin, so not the pit, right? And hazagim elo pnimim. The zagim is the internal part, which I'm calling the pit, which I know has a better name than a pith. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says, no. I say the exact opposite. Don't make the mistake that Rabbi Yehuda just made. Kizug shel behema. Think of it like a zug of an animal. Zug is a bell, right? So think of it like the bell, the bell that the animal wears around its neck. The way we refer to that, again, these are terms that are not useful to me, but the bell that an animal wears, the chitzon, meaning the actual metal part, is called, right? What's the difference? There's a clapper and the outside, right? So the outside is called the zog, and the pinimi is called the inbal. That's the clapper, right? So the zog is not the inside; it's the outside. The zog is the skin, and the chartzan is the pit, which is how I translated it before. So that's a machloket Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda.
Rashi on Chumash holds with Rabbi Yossi.
Right. So that's how I explain. The chartzan is a pit.
Yeah.
But again, our Mishnah is a machloket.
Yeah.
Continues the Gemara. So let's try to understand this, right? What is our Mishnah saying? Shlosha minin asurim and Nazir, and we listed Tuma and Tiglachat, which we're not going to discuss here right away, at least. But the third thing we said was Yotzei min hagef. Now the implication is, says the Gemara, the first thing is Hayotzei min hagefen in that which is a product of the vine is yes, meaning is yes prohibited. But gefen atzmo lo. The actual vine itself, if you want to go to some fancy restaurant and they serve you shoots from the tree, that's not prohibited to a Nazir, right? Of course, the main thing that we generally eat from a grape tree are the grape leaves, right, which are very popular to eat. But it doesn't have to just mean the leaves; it can mean parts of the tree. I mean, there's plenty of places where you eat raw, not raw, but immature shoots, right? Where I don't know if they taste like anything, but they sound very exciting. So the parts
Palm
of the tree
shoots.
I'm sorry?
Palm shoots.
Well, these are not palm trees, but shoots.
Yeah, but we eat shoots. Yeah.
Right. I don't actually know what grape shoots would look like, but
Neither do I. I've only been to one grapevine in my vineyard in my life.
But again, it doesn't have to be shoots. I mean, you can somehow chew on. I mean, just to be clear, if it's inedible, right? If it's a tree, then I don't think anyone holds its usher. That's something that is soft enough or fresh enough that it can give some kind of edible part. So that's the implication, right? That our Mishnah says that which is Yotzei min hagefen, but not the gefen atzmo. Now, matnitim to look Rabbi Elazar. That disagrees with the opinion of the Tana of Rabbi Elazar. The Tanya is Rabbi Elazar Omer afilu alin velulavim b'mashma. Even the leaves and the lulav, which I translate as shoots. I don't know if someone has another word for it, but that's what we think of, right? A lulav of a vine, of course, right? It's not a date palm, right? But the lulav are also included, meaning a Nazir cannot eat grape leaves, right? Which seems very interesting. According to Rabbi Elazar, our Mishnah made it sound like it's not true that a Nazir could eat grape leaves as long as they don't have wine with them, because that's not considered to be the product of the tree. That's the tree itself. Okay. Now, Ika da Amri, Some said that, in fact, this discussion was said about the Seif of the Mishnah, because the Seif of the Mishnah said, Eino chayav ad ela ad shiyocham min ha'anavim kizayit. You're only chayav, well, the Seif means the next words, really, right? Not the end of the Mishnah. The next words were that you're not chayav until you eat from the grapes a kizayit worth. And that implies only the grapes, min ha'anavim, in. Now, we know that it doesn't just mean the grapes, because we know also you're chayav for the pits and for the skin, but clearly we're excluding something. So what are we excluding when we say only the product? It's the product, gefen atzmo lo, but not the vine or parts of the vine itself, and that's matzitin to look Rebbe Lazar. And the same argument is that this goes against Rebbe Lazar. The Tanya Rebbe Lazar Omer afilu alin v'lulavim b'mashma, that you'd be chayav even for eating the grape leaves and the shoots that come out of the tree, the vine. Ask the Gemara, and this is our way of introducing our Mishnah, really. Right? So this is a very fascinating way the Gemara does this. Instead of actually bringing the opinions in the Mishnah, we derive from our Mishnah that someone disagrees with the Mishnah, and then we try to understand what they disagree about. This, over the next few days, I would say, is going to open up the whole sugya, because the whole question is, how do you read these psukim, right? Again, the way, I'm just going to review it because it's very complex, right? That first pasuk, which I encourage everyone to go back and read, it's in the chat, said many specific things, right? It had a lot of details. So the first pasuk, Gimel, had, certain things that you can't eat, anavim, lachim, veishim, etc. The next pasuk was very general, right? It says, kol asher ye'aseh migefen hayayin, everything. And then, so that itself, we have to talk about what's included. Is it everything from the gefen hayayin? Is it just these specific things? So that's one discussion. The next complication is that there's a third clause at the end of the second pasuk, which again is very limiting, right? It says chartzanim adzag. It's very specific, not limiting. It's very specific. So the question is, and we are all familiar with the ideas of klal pradu klal, or the opposite. This is not a klal pradu klal. This is a klal upratni, right? So specifics, general, and then specifics. But or miyot riboy miyot. There's different ways we'll do it. But that's what we're going to discuss. How do you understand the intent of these psukim? And more broadly, whenever the Torah gives you, clauses and limitations, how do you integrate those? So, b'maika miflik, says the Gemara, what is the machloket Rebbe Lazar and the Chachamim, which again on the surface is whether you're prohibited to eat grape leaves, right? Does the Torah prohibit the product of the tree or the product plus the tree itself? Says the Gemara, Rebbe Lazar is daresh ribuye umiute. Rebbe Lazar is daresh the Torah when it gives rules as adding and subtracting, meaning, I'm not sure I'm going to do justice to this, but we'll get there over the next few days because it's very complex. But essentially, the difference between ribuye and miute and what the Rabbanan, which is Rabbanan darshi klalei upratei, is that the Rabbanan feel that the Torah is there to make generalizations, right? So you basically can learn from what it says in the pasuk to other things, and of course you can limit your generalizations, and that's what the pratim are. The Rebbe Lazar does not agree with that. Rebbe Lazar is somewhat more textual, more literal in the text, that the Torah is just adding things and subtracting things, but not teaching you to make general principles from it. Now, of course, that's not literally true. Rebbe Lazar is going to make general principles too, but we're going to see the implications over the next few days. So, Rebbe Lazar darish ribuye umiyote, and this is how you read the psukim. The first pasuk says, "Miyayin v'shechar yazir," right? Separate yourself from wine and whatever shechar is, alcoholic stuff. That is a mi'et. Right? That is a specific cases. Don't drink wine. Don't drink things that are intoxicating. What is the next pasuk which says, "Mikol asher ye'aseh migefen hayayin"? Anything that's made, that's very general, right? Kol asher ye'aseh, clearly general. That's made from the grapes of I'm not sure what gefen hayayin even means, right? The products, I guess, the wine. That is riba. That includes more things. So what you have is a mi'et riba. You have a specific, and then you have a more broad thing. So what you do in that case is riba kol. You include everything, right? Now, what does that mean? You include everything. My riba kol mili. Anything that comes from a grapevine is included in the prohibition. So if that's the case, why did the first pasuk say only specific things? Just say everything. So you have to exclude something, but what you exclude is only the most far-fetched thing. My mi'et, what do I exclude from the first pasuk which said, yain v'shechar? Mi'et shabishata, is I think how you pronounce it. You exclude shabishata, which are the branches, basically, that are inedible, essentially. So you exclude the thing that is least likely to be eaten from the grapevine, but you don't exclude the leaves, which are, as I said, edible, and shoots, which we don't know what they are, but I guess are something that is not uncommonly eaten, right? So basically, because you use miut and riba, you end up including everything, and you only exclude the most far-fetched thing. The Rabbanan, with the same words, are darshe, klali, uprati. They learn that you use the concept of principles, of klalim and exclusions, and so therefore the way you read it is the following: Yain v'shechar yazir. The first pasuk says, "Don't drink wine and intoxicating wine beverages, like brandy is really what shechar means. Prat or vermouth, I think. Prat, that's a prat, right? That's specifics. Don't drink those things. Then the next pasuk says, "Mikol asher ya'aseh migefen hayayin." Anything that's made migefen hayayin, that's a klal. Now the Chachamim introduced something new here, and they don't stop there, right? Unlike Rebbe Lazar, who said there's a first pasuk is specific, the second pasuk is general. The Chachamim say, look, the first pasuk was a prat, the second pasuk is a klal, but there's a third clause, because at the end of the second pasuk it again says chartzanim ad zag, which are very specific parts of the grape, right? So that is chazar uprat. That is the Torah coming on and doing a new prat, right? And so you have prat, a detail, a klal, a general thing, uprat, and another detail. So what that tells you to do in that situation of prat, klal, uprat is iyat adan elok ein prat. You have a principle, but it's limited by not by exclusions, which is what Rebbe Lazar said, that everything's included, but certain specific things are excluded. Here, the generalization has to be similar to what is said in the prat. What is said in the prat? Ma prat, just like the prat is referred to something that's mufurash, specifically says that it has to be pre-upsolet pre. It has to be either the food itself, the pre, meaning the grape itself, or a product of the grape, or the psolet pre, or the the thrown away part of the grape, meaning the skin or the pith or things like that. So it has to be specifically related to the pre. So af kol, so too when you have your klal, everything that's prohibited has to be pre, upsolet pre. It has to either be the food, the pre itself, the fruit itself, the grape, or the waste of the grape, upsolet of that grape. Not things like the leaves or the shoots or parts of the tree. Okay. Now, before we ask the question, where we've done two different things. We said, first of all, klal uprat versus riba and miyah, which I haven't explained yet why those are different. And then we've added that in the Chachamim, there's a third clause, right? So it's not clear at this point in the Gemara whether the argument is the third clause or the argument is how you evaluate the first two clauses. And again, this is going to open up as we go further and see many, many details. And both things are going to be true. Ask the Gemara, before we, again, get into that detail, explain to me how the Chachamim are so confident that what they're teaching is right? You have a miyah, which says the pre. You have a riba, which says everything, kol yotzei min hagefen. Then you have another miyah, which is chartzanim ad zad, right? So you said it only refers to the fruit and things that come from fruit, right? Says the Gemara, why don't you say, right? If that's the way, I could read the pasuk totally differently. I could say, Maha prat mufarash pri gamor. Maybe in order to be chayav, the Torah only speaks about the grape itself. It doesn't speak about part of the grape. So maybe you need to have a pre-gamor, by that I don't mean the whole grape. I mean a finished grape, meaning a mature grape. So maybe you need afkol pre-gamor. So maybe everything that you are chayav in, right, would need to be a complete finished grape. Now we're taking into assumption at this point that which we're going to discuss later, that you would be chayav as a nazir even if you ate an immature grape, right? It doesn't need to just be a completely mature grape. But how do you know that? Maybe that's not true. Amrit, they said back, Amarta, they said, in Cain, if that's how you read the pasuk, that it has to be a pre-gamor, right? What would then be included in the pasuk that wasn't said? Meaning, you have a klal, right, the middle pasuk, which says kol asher yaseh migefen. What is that adding, right? Right? What is that adding? If you're saying, what is added that you didn't say yet? If it's anavim lachim veshim, if you're talking about grapes, that are dried or moist, aktivi, the pasuk explicitly says, if you're talking about yayin mechomet, talking about wine, which is a product of a grape, or vinegar, haktivi, the Torah says that. So then there's nothing extra that's added. So what is the Torah adding? Therefore, you can't say the second way you propose this. Ela klashon rishon, you have to say it's from the first case, basically. Meaning that the Torah is telling you it has to be a grape or a grape product, not, according to the Chachamim, the tree. So things that are not grapes, that are grown on the vine, like the leaves and the shoots, are not prohibited. But it's expanding what it says in the pasuk. It's not just the grape, a mature grape, it's even an immature grape would be prohibited. But we ask, if that's the case, then a grape would presumably include the pit and the skin on top of the grape. I mean, if you're talking about an object, why does an object include everything in the object, right? So why in the world then, that's the Gemara's question, why in the world then, according to the Chachamim, right? Me'achar, I'm going to read the Gemara now again. Me'achar shesofeinu l'rabot kol davar. Since we ultimately are going to include everything, by everything we mean everything that comes from the grape, including the skin of the grape and the pit of the grape, right? If that's the case, ma tamul nomer mechartzanim adzak. Why do you need that third pasuk? Right? Why does the Torah have to say, including the pits and the seeds, not the seeds, the pits and the skin, right? Why did it have to say that? We ultimately are going to include everything that's a grape and derived from a grape. Says the Gemara, well, you're right. You don't necessarily need that, but this is here to tell you how to read the psukim. This is like a limud for the entire Torah. This is to tell you that kol makom sha'ata motzei prat uklal, right? Every time that you see a Torah where it says a prat, a specific thing, and then it follows it by a general thing, like this case, it said a grape, and then it said mikosher yasem geffen, anything from the geffen, right? In that case, generally, say the Chachamim, you cannot use that. You cannot use the klal to add things to expand and don't like the prat. Ella naaseh klal musaf ala prat. In that case, the principle would just be adding, meaning it wouldn't be telling you a rule, it would be adding specifics. It's like saying plus something else, right? You can add one detail, but you can't turn that into a general principle unless, except for this case, unless the Torah itself, the pasuk itself, specifies it for you, like it did by Nazir. And so basically, what we're learning at this point is that if the Torah just said the detail, the first part, the prat, and then said the klal, what I would have said is that the prat is what it says, right? A grape and things that come from a grape. The klal adds some more detail to that, right? What the detail adds is maybe one more thing, maybe also immature grapes or something like that. But the fact is that now that we have a second prat, which says the chartzanim adzag, right, the pits and the seeds and the skin, that tells you now that when we added with the klal in the middle, we were adding everything that's similar to that prat, not just the prat, everything that's similar. What's common to that prat is that it's a product, it's the grape. And so now we include everything related to the grape, including immature grapes and pits and skins and all of that. But otherwise, if the Torah had not done that, we would not have the freedom to add things based on the klal. Okay, so that is the Chachamim's first formulation of what we have by Nazir, which again is a prat, klal, uprat. Specific, a general and a specific. And the limit here is that in fact you go with the general, but it has to be limited to what is similar to what was said in the prat.
How do you say that? What is it? Zag something.
Zag, yeah.
Is a prat. I mean, it seems like it's kind of like trying to be general there, like it's the whole thing, you know.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying it's specific in that it's a specific part of the grape.
Right,
but it's not a product, it's not wine, it's not the tree, it's not.
Right, but it's saying any part of the grape. Don't think.
I mean, it's not saying, you're saying that, and I agree, that's what we say. But the Torah doesn't say any part of the grape. The Torah says that part of the grape. It's a very specific part. you're learning from there, which is what we just did, that the same way you included that specific part of the grape, it means any part of the grape, basically, or any type of grape too.
So
Seems like, go ahead.
no, go ahead. You finish up.
It just seems like the odd, it's like it's the whole.
Oh, you're saying from the oh, that's interesting. We will discuss that, but we're not saying that right now. Meaning,
I know.
you're saying Chachanim Adag means like nuts to bolts kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Like. Right. So we're not dashing that now. It is a good point. We're dashing it as these two parts, inside to the outside kind of thing, which is
right. Which they say it's a prod, but I read it more as like
cover to cover.
Right. Exactly. From A to Z.
Right. That's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get there. We're going to discuss that point, but we're trying to do this much more sort of, generally, I would say. Let's do a little more because
I have a question.
Yeah. Before we
So in Rabbi Ishmael's principles that we read every morning, we have klau pra, we have prat uklau, and we have klau prat uklau, but we don't have prat uklau uprat.
Correct.
Which is what we seem to be talking about here.
Correct.
And secondly, the opinion of the rabbi seems to be like Rabbi Akiva elsewhere in the Talmud, where he talks about riboy, parallel path.
So I'll just say that this is going to be a topic of discussion for the next week.
Okay.
So this is just an introduction into all these details. I'm not sure it's going to be much clearer after a week, but
okay.
I would say that it hopefully will be. But this is the beginning. We're really just sort of unpacking, all these concepts. Nazir is a great example because of the way the psukim are. But you are correct that the way the Nazir is written is, and we've been very clear, is a prat first, a klal in the middle, a prat at the end, according to the Chachamim. And whether that's different than a klal, prat, or klal, we're going to discuss. That's topic's going to come up in the Gemara.
Okay.
So let's just do a little bit more so we don't leave too much for tomorrow. Amar Mar, we're quoting back on this whole statement we've said, which we will continue to quote for a while. Ma prat mufurash pri upsolet pri. Just like, right, we learned that just like the prat, this was in our initial prat, klal, prat. The Chachamim said, just like the prat is either the pri or the psolet, which I don't know how you translate psolet so much, the detritus, right, of the pri, the leftover. Afkol pri psolet pri. We also include all things like that. What does that mean? What are you including? So pri, the one taken for granted is the envy, is the grapes, right? That's easy. Torah says that. Psolet pri. Now, what would you mean by psolet pri? That's chometz. That's vinegar, which is the product of grapes that are fermented. But what are you then including when you say af kol pri? So we want to include anything that's related to the grape. Maihi. That's guharki. That is guharki, which are unripe grapes, right? Which are immature grapes. So things that you could eat, they have to be edible, right? But they're these tiny little. You see, Rashi here says these small grapes that grow among the larger grapes. So and everyone see that. You have the tiny ones that are clearly not. They didn't get a lot of nourishment, right? But they're edible. That's also prohibited because they are grapes, right? And psolet pri, what are you including by psolet pri? Afkol de psolet pri, maihi amref kahana latuye invi dichrin. What that actually is including is invi dichrin, which means wormy grapes. So it has bugs in them, right? So it's liu, as Rashi said, right? As the Mefarish says. So the bugs that got the grapes, the grapes that got the bugs, right? That's included as well if prohibited in eating them. The adzag. So then what do you include with that last pasuk of adzag, meaning what extra comes from there? Amaravina latuye de bein habinayim. That includes, there's a lot of different discussions about what bein habinayim means. It literally means in between, right? But the Mefarish here describes it. It's not the only opinion. Is that there's actually like sort of a very thin layer between the skin and the grape. He calls it that davar hakarush. It's a little like liquid kind, not liquid karush, is congealed thing between a grape and the skin that you basically can peel off and you can make some kind of preserves with. So there's another layer within the grape, and that's included in the prohibition as well. That's what bein habinayim. That's not. There are other people who disagree, but that's this Mefarish, and it's very simple. One Amar Mar. Now let's go back and try to understand this again more. we said ma pra'i is really we add ma prat mufurash pri gamor. Just like the prat, you might have thought to say, right? You might have thought that the prat is something which is only a pri gamor, and therefore afkol pri gamor. You have to have the mature, the ripe, the complete fruit, right? Not immature. So amarta. So then you said, right? If the only thing you're including is a mature, a ripe grape, then what has been included that's not in that category? Meaning, what is by the klal of kol asher yasem yagefen? What is included that's not part of the pasuk? So then we said it must be if it's anavim lachim viveshim. This is going to quote. If it's the anavim that are whole haktivi, that's said. If it's yain mechometz, if it's the product of the grapes or the fermentation haktivi, that's said. Right? So then we said, therefore, that's why the second saying was wrong, and you have to go the way you said it originally. Again, this is all quotes. And since ultimately we're going to include everything, meaning including the immature things, so why do you have to specifically say chartanim adzag? And we said, that's to tell you, every other place in the Torah, essentially, that you find a prat uklal, you can't then derive a lot of things from that. You can't extend it and ladonoke in a prat and say we want the klal adds more things that are similar to the prat. Elanasa klal mosif ala prat. In those cases, the klal would add on to the prat until the Torah has told you Nazir adzag, right? Until it tells you like chartzanim adzag, so like Nazir, where you had a prat, a klal, and a prat. Again, that's the whole quote. Ask the Gemara on that quote. We'll just read 2 lines, and then I think we'll have to stop. Well, ask the Gemara, but according to Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah in our Mishnah, right? Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah in our Mishnah was the kamokim lahai. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah used these verse of chartzanim adzag to lomar lecha to tell you lomar she'eno chayav ad she'yochal shnei chartzanim b'zag. Right? He had, remember, this very specific halacha, which again we'll have to discuss more what it means, but it's a very bizarre and specific halacha that you have to have 2 chartzanim and 1 zag in order to be chayav. Well, whatever that means, clearly the pasuk is there to tell you that it's not a prat, right? So if it's not a prat, pratam minale. You're according to the Chachamim, you need to have a prat, klal, or prat to learn this. But according to Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, you lost the last pasuk, so you lost your prat. You're right, you did. But Savar Lei, Rebbe Elazar. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah conveniently holds like Rebbe Elazar, who's not the same person, right? But he holds like Rebbe Elazar in this discussion. The Darish miyat uriba, who darshans miyat and riba, and therefore, again, we don't know why that's better yet. That's going to still to be remains. But in according to Rebbe Elazar, you don't need a third clause. You have a miyat and a riba, and you can learn everything from that. It's only the Chachamim who need a third clause, and therefore, that's how Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah will have to learn, because he's using the third clause for something else. We'll see tomorrow. I think it's dope that there's another answer that in fact the third clause is there and it's extra, but that's going to be a good way to get into the sugya tomorrow. So I think we'll stop here. And,
Question?
Yes.
Is Tom Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua?
It is. You're asking that?
Yes.
Correct. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua is usually Rabbi Elazar.
Okay.
They have it, and also
As opposed to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah.
Right. Who's always identified with
And
his.
of course, very different than Rabbi Eliezer. Which is a little different.
Right. It completely.
Square or long rectangular?
Correct. Okay, excellent. Shavua Tov.
Ellie,
So,
where
yes.
I wasn't looking inside. Where are you up to exactly?
So we got up to the top of Lamed Ham Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top of Yibay Dema. I'm not sure, you might want to go back and read some of it because it is in the middle of
Yeah.
this
Okay,
very
thank you.
complex sugya.
Yeah, I know.
Which I will leave in your hands. So,
Okay.
Looking
Thank
forward.
Shavua Tov.
Good talk.